If you've been around for a while, then you know how much I care about financial freedom for all. One thing that often gets in the way of that is debt. That's why I'm happy to announce that I've partnered with an amazing organization called Juno. Juno helps you get lower interest rates by using the power of group negotiation. It is a completely free resource that you can use to secure lower interest rates on new and existing student loans. Head to the link in the episode show notes to find out more. This is the Dreamers Podcast, episode 50, with a very special guest. Today is December 28th, 2021.
People have beat that dead horse so much about having an emergency fund, but it's critical because people don't realize that if your lifeline depends on credit card debt is by far one of the worst to ever have, right? We're talking about a minimum 15% interest rate on a debt that's going to continue to accrue and compound monthly. It's best to focus on having that emergency fund so that when those real life situation happens, at least you can react.
Hello world, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I am Stephanie Anne-Lyse, also known as Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm a financial coach and an author. I self-published my first book, Dream of Legacy, a guide to help dreamers reach financial independence and build generational wealth. In this podcast, I'll have conversations with experts and thought leaders who dare to follow their dreams. You'll hear about their journey and their money stories. I hope it inspires you, dreamers out there, to live life on your own terms.
Come on, dreamers, let's change the world!
This podcast is brought to you by Dream of Legacy. Check out dreamoflegacy.com for resources to assist you on your journey to financial independence. Before we get into today's episode, please take a couple minutes to go into Apple Podcasts if you're listening from an Apple device to rate and review the podcast. If you appreciate the free resources that are provided in this podcast, then the best way to let me know is to do just that. Reviews help the podcast be more visible and it helps other dreamers discover the podcast. So thank you. I appreciate you. And now let's get back to today's episode. Hello, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth. And I'm so glad that you've decided to tune in for today's episode. If you are an OG listener, thank you for showing up every week. And if you're new to the podcast, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Today is December 28th. We are a few days away from the end of the year. And initially, I was going to re-air previous popular episode. But then I realized that it was episode 50, guys. I can't believe we've made it to the 50th episode. And I thought it made sense to bring on a very, very special guest. So today I am chatting with my husband and we are talking about how we are managing our finances together as a couple and so much more. So here is my husband, Serge.
Hello, Dreamers. This is Serge. I'm glad to be here.
So glad to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast and do this with the Dreamers.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So do you mind telling the Dreamers a little bit about you and what you do?
So my name is Serge. I am a financial service professional. Been working in banking and credit for the last 8 years, but I've always been interested in technology and working in the product space. So this is kind of what I'm doing right now.
So where are you originally from?
Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire.
And this is a question that I like to ask all of my guests, but can you share an early money memory?
One of the first money memory I can remember was when I was first going to school overseas and my parents had to send me over by myself.
Where?
Somewhere in the south of France. My mom gave me a huge amount of money in cash for a kid that's like 10, 11 years old. And as you can imagine, as soon as I touched down, I just blew through it through buying some nonsense. And
how much was it?
I think it was 1,000 francs at the time. So it was still French francs at the time that I was going. So
$200?
Something like that. So I had to learn the hard way that money doesn't grow on trees.
How long did you end up staying in France?
So for the first go around, 2 years. After that, I came back to the Ivory Coast.
you graduated from high school in Côte d'Ivoire, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about, I guess, your journey to the U.S.
Well, it was definitely unpredictable. Came right after high school, went to engineering school, trying to graduate and be the next Bill Gates, go back home to start my Ivory in Microsoft, but things didn't quite pan out that way. There was a long civil war in Ivory Coast that kept me in the U.S. for a little over 12, 13 years. Yeah, came to go to school, graduated, ended up staying, working, and now live here. My family's here, my kids are American.
And so how did you end up in product management?
I was working in the automotive space and I was looking for re-engineering of my career. So I went back to school for an MBA. And at the end of the program, landed up a job in banking as a product manager. And that was kind of my first exposure to that space, but grew to love it and never looked back.
That's one thing that I really like about you, right? Obviously, I am a full-time entrepreneur now, and I think I've shared before that one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur is because I was starting to get frustrated with my job. You are one of those employees who love what they do. So this is just to say again that not everybody is meant to be a full-time entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is to enjoy what you do. So you can actually live your life and not just survive.
Absolutely. It definitely helps to enjoy what you do and not be burdened by waking up every morning to go punch in.
Before the year ends, we usually go through this process of looking at our finances, see how we did the previous year or the current year, and set our goals for the following year.
That's right.
But before we do that, we typically, because our wedding anniversary is at the end of December, so we typically go through this exercise of looking at what some of our individual financial goals are in the next year or so. And then when it's time to create a budget for the following year, we see if we can make them fit.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, one of my goals next year was to go on a big trip at the end of next year, which is a large expense. And you also had some things that you wanted to do. So it's definitely a good process for us at the beginning, at the end of the year, to talk about those things so that when it comes time to create our budget, we keep that in mind. So we just went through our budget review and planning for the year. So how did we do in 2021, given that it's actually my first full year in business? So first year as a full-time solopreneur, how did we do as far as like finances are concerned?
I think it's been a good year. It's actually the first year that you're cash flow positive, right?
Correct.
So big deal, big deal.
So before we get further into this though, I would like to kind of go back to our beginnings as a couple. Recently in December, I wrote a story about a honeymoon in Bora Bora for Business Insider, and I'll make sure to link that in the show notes. But that's how we started budgeting together. I think I've shared on the podcast before that I've been budgeting since I was 13 years old, but we started budgeting as a couple before we got married because of this big goal that we had.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I mean, we weren't making a ton of money, but we were able to fund this trip by being intentional about how we were spending our money and saving, and we started investing together. We started side hustling together as well. But I'm curious to hear from you. How did it feel to be able to accomplish that goal, that financial goal at the time? When we first talked about it, we didn't know how we were going to make it happen.
It was incredible. I mean, you're talking about the trip of a lifetime, right? Like how many people can say that they went to Bora Bora on their honeymoon, let alone just get to French Polynesia? How many people can even locate it on a map? It was awesome. And I think that was part of how we actually got excited about it, right? Because we realized that it was such an amazing trip. And so
we were able to make that happen. And I know like for me, it was an eye-opening experience. I remember going out there. First of all, we had to get on 3 different flights and a boat ride to get to our hotel. And I remember getting there, and the entire time, I think we were there for like 8 or 9 days, and we did not see another Black person. We only saw one that happened to be from
Côte d'Ivoire, out of all places.
And I remember getting there and thinking, man, I wish more of our people could experience this. And also, that's when we decided that travel was going to be a part of our life, even when we got married. And so the whole time we've been budgeting. I want to hear about, what do you think about our budgeting process? Maybe do you want to share it with the audience and tell me how, was it challenging to do that in the beginning?
As a couple, it's probably one of the most important things that you want to get alignment on, right? Like budgeting and finances, as we all know the statistics. Most of the reasons for divorce are related to money. And so getting that alignment up front as you start embarking on a relationship is pretty critical. And I mean, we did a great job at that, right? Like I was financially okay, but not literally savvy. And you were studying accounting, being a CPA. Obviously, you had a lot of knowledge in that space. So it kind of worked out, right? At least to my advantage. But it was a challenging process, at least for me, because I'm also an impulsive buyer, right? I'm one of those where I kind of need to get reined in, and you are someone who's been conservative most of your life and, you know, who's done a great job at budgeting. So once you kind of showed me that by allocating your money to everything that you want to do, it actually gives you more clarity into how you're spending and how you're moving, and reduces a lot of stress and the anxiety about not knowing where your money is going and how much you have in your account or whatever. So once you get through understanding those benefits, then it's a no-brainer. And I think we got through that pretty quickly and pretty early on in our relationship. And I helped to kind of solidify our relationship long-term as one of the main pillars.
Yeah, you know, over the past couple of years, our saving, even investing rate went down a little bit because obviously we're getting ready. Well, first of all, getting ready for me living the corporate world and also me starting a business. So we had to allocate some of our earnings towards that, or at least that's the decision that we decided to make. But we were looking at our numbers for this year, and I think we did okay, right? As far as like investing for the future.
Yeah, I think
Almost at 30%. So given the fact that my business is still new, I think that's good. And, you know, we were looking at next year, bumping it up to probably 40%. So how does it feel knowing that you are earning, or we are earning the money, but we are essentially... It's not losing, right? But a good chunk of it you don't even see because, you know, in addition to investing for ourselves, there is still also investing for our kids, which is not included in that percentage that we just shared.
Well, it's not a big deal, right? Because I think we're at a stage in our lives where most of our expenses really are all around household stuff or things that we're doing for the kids or maybe trips that we're planning, right? So we have a pretty solid handle on our expenses and our quality of life, so that we don't really feel that money is missing. Most of the time, a lot of our investments are automated anyway, so you don't even feel it. Just set it and forget it. But it's not a big deal. And I think when we do have emergencies and when there are things that happen that cause us to pause and to reassess, we also do that. And so it's not that we're just saving and investing for the sake of it. It's just intentional and it's aligned with the plan that we have. And so we're just executing.
And speaking of emergencies, that's one thing that we looked at also because we had quite a few emergencies this year. Just having that emergency fund or those funds that you can access really helped us, while just not having to touch any of our long-term savings or getting to debt. Yeah, we literally, over a short period of time, used up about 3 months of emergency
fund. Yeah. People have beat that dead horse so much about having an emergency fund, but it's critical because people don't realize that if your lifeline depends on credit card debt is by far one of the worst to ever have, right? Like, I mean, we're talking about a minimum 15% interest rate on a debt that's going to continue to accrue and compound monthly. It's best to focus on having that emergency fund so that when those real life situation happens, at least you can react.
So true. There are several ways that couples can decide to handle their finances. I know for us, we decided from the beginning that we were going to join our finances, but we also wanted to maintain certain level of independence. So all of our money goes through one of our joint accounts, except business income, obviously. But as far as like personal income, we also have something that we call, quote unquote, an allowance, which is kind of like money that we each have to do whatever we want to do with, that we get every month in our individual personal checking accounts without having to ask the other person. What do you think about that? What do you think about the fact that you are earning money or I'm earning money, but most of the moves that we make, we have to consult with each other.
Well, I think that's cool, right? You have to communicate. And I think if you can communicate smoothly and transparently about money, then you can communicate about anything. So I don't have any problems with that.
And it makes me realize that we never really set an amount. Like some couples will say any expense over $500, $1,000, $200, we have to consult with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we never really did that. Do you think it's something that we could benefit from?
I'm sure there's some pros and some cons, but there hasn't been a need for us to do that, right? I think even if we don't necessarily ask for permission, we're pretty transparent in terms of when we're going to spend some money. I can recall of...
But what if you want to spend $1,000 on something that you care about?
Well, then take that as part of your allowance, just like anything else, right? So if you have an allotted amount of money, then you got to make sure that you can fit that in that budget. But the cool thing about having your allowance and spending without asking or telling the other partner is, sometimes you want to surprise your partner, right? Like, so you can't always be coming in and ask for money. If you want to buy a gift or something like that, then it's going to be pretty obvious. Everybody wants to have independence to a certain extent. So it's good to have your own allowance to make your own moves.
And I think also one of the ways that we are able to plan for those larger expenses is by having those discussions right at the end of the year, talking about the things that you care about that are going to cost a few dollars and getting your partner on board with it so that we can finance it as a couple or save for it. So let's talk a little bit about our decision for me to quit my job and start this entrepreneurial journey. We kind of had a nice little flow as far as our finances and the way they were set up. Now it's been 2 years. I want to hear more about how you felt inside, because to be honest, you kind of encouraged me to take that chance.
Yeah. No, I did, but it was the right thing to do because it was just getting out of control. It's always cool to have dual income as a household, but, not to the detriment of your health and your peace of mind, I would say. And so it was scary, right? Because we didn't know what was going to happen. I think from a mental and emotional standpoint, it was the right thing to do for you, for our family, and we have no regrets because it's been a wonderful journey just to see how you've literally made something out of nothing and how your business now is really starting to pick up and thrive. So it's also an amazing example for the kids, right? Because the girls get to see you as you're building this from scratch, and it gives them something to look forward to and literally a blueprint that they can follow and be their own woman.
I don't know if you remember, but back then, before quitting my job, I had been unhappy at work for a little bit, and I had the option of getting another job. I had options, but I decided not to go that route. So we kind of created a plan so that I could exit out of corporate and try to figure things out. Why didn't you encourage me to go look for another job?
Well, because what we needed at the time was flexibility. You had to be available and you needed to be able to travel to handle certain things on the family side. And so having another job wouldn't necessarily help. Like, yeah, you would have replaced your income, but you still would have been trading your time for money and you wouldn't have been able to take off whenever you needed to. So that wasn't a situation that we needed to be in. If income was something that we were interested in, then you could have just stuck with your initial position. But that's not what we're into, really. It was about just your sanity and making sure that we were allocating and devoting our time to things that were important to us, like our loved ones and our family. That was the priority.
And that's one thing that I talk about all the time, how wealth to me is about so much more than just money. It's actually the things that you can do when money isn't as big of a concern. It's the time that you get back. That's definitely the most important. So as challenging as the past 2 years have been, I was able to really step up and be there for, as you said, my loved ones beyond just our family. And I've been able to start this business and really focus on doing work that I love. And to me, that's priceless.
That's awesome. It's amazing. When you do work that is aligned with your purpose, I think it's so gratifying. And so I'm happy that you were able to find that.
But yeah, back in those days, I remember actually saying to you, I don't want to do this anymore at my job, but I don't want to leave and go work somewhere else. I'm going to stay here until I'm miserable so I can actually go and bet on myself. In hindsight, that was crazy. But the thing that actually made me realize that I wanted my time back, I didn't want to work for someone else anymore, at least not at this stage of my life, is actually something that your dad said. You remember that?
Yeah, I think it has something to do about your earning potential.
Yes. He said, because basically your father has been working for himself pretty much his entire career as a lawyer. And he said that he could not comprehend the earning was capped by someone else.
It's always been a big debate in my household because my dad being an entrepreneur, right? Because if you're a lawyer, you run your own practice, you're your own business. And my mother, who's a government worker. And so there was always this dilemma in the household, which is best. And I think it depends, right? There's no right or wrong. But for my dad, his way of seeing it was like, you can't let someone limit your earning potential. If you're a man or a woman with the ability to earn a living because you have a skill that you mastered, then you should really just own it and really just earn as much as you want to earn and not let anyone put a cap on your salary. But not everybody is made to be an entrepreneur.
I've known you for almost 20 years now, and you've always had a side hustle. From making and selling t-shirts to interning at TI Studio to selling cars. You've always had something going on outside of your job. It's important to have something that you own.
Agreed. I think if you're clear on what you're passionate about, it makes it easier. But not everybody knows what their passion is. And even if you know what your passion is, sometimes those passions are not able to be monetized, right? So
Or not easily
monetized. So, or the business model doesn't make sense. So, there's a lot of components to become an entrepreneur. And I've been clear on my passions. I think that's one thing that I was able to find soon in my life. I love music. So I've naturally gravitated towards anything that had to do with audio engineering and producing music or arranging songs, mixing, mastering, etc. My side hustle have always kind of revolved around the entertainment space and the creative space because those are things that I enjoy. And I've always found ways to figure out what product and services to sell.
What was your first side hustle?
I was a barber in college. So the interesting story about that is obviously I came from the Ivory Coast, and when I got to college, I went to the barbershop after a couple of weeks and sat on a chair. The price that the barber quoted me was literally like 20 times what I was accustomed to paying in Ivory Coast, right? So I was doing the math in my head. I was converting in CFAs. And so after that first time, I was like, there's no way I'm paying this amount to get a haircut every other week. And so I talked to my uncle at the time. We went to Walmart. I bought me some clippers. I started learning to cut hair on my own, and I got pretty good at it. So that became my side hustle. When I was in college, I was in the dorms. I started undercutting all of the local barbers, getting like $5 a haircut or something, and just making a little money on the side.
And so you've been side hustling throughout your life. For anyone listening who might not want to be a full-time entrepreneur, but is ready to start considering side hustling or is ready to start a side hustle, what kind of advice can you give them to help them get started?
Again, I'm a big proponent of doing something that you love. If your sole purpose is to make money, I don't think that you'll be very good at or very successful at a side hustle. But this is just Serge's opinion, right? I think if you start with something that you love, there are existing businesses in those areas where you can start networking with people who are involved in those spaces. Always someone who believes in intentional networking. So just always come with something to offer instead of something to ask, because that opens a lot more doors for you. And so if you can connect with a professional in that line of business that you're interested in side hustling, you can learn, you can serve those people, and you can learn the tricks of the trade until you're ready to launch on your own.
Good advice. I like to end the interview with a round of rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
What's a book that changed your perspective on life?
The Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela.
What's one thing about money you wish you could tell your younger self?
The sooner you start saving and investing, the better off you'll be in life.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
My education and just being a lifelong learner, because we never stop learning, right?
Filling the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is...
Freedom.
What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be that I will leave the future generation better than the ones that came before them.
It's been great having you on the podcast.
Yeah, it's been fun. I listen to it all the time, so it's going to be weird to be on the other side this time listening to myself.
Do you have any last words that you want to share with the Dreamers?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dreamers, for listening and for supporting Anne-Lyse through this journey. It's been awesome to listen to the various guests who are coming on with tremendous amount of jewels and gems and so many nuggets of wisdom that they're giving out for free. So love the community that you're building. I would love for more engagement, more people leaving us reviews and sharing and commenting and really making sure that we are spreading the word out because there's a lot of great content and someone needs to hear
That's my sales director. No, but really, thank you. Thank you for always saying yes, no matter how crazy my ideas are. Thank you for always supporting me, and thank you for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Dreamers, we have someone in here that decided to come join us for another round of rapid fire questions. There's my daughter, Kaylin.
Hi, Dreamers.
So you want to tell me about a book that you really, really like?
The Secret Zoo.
The Secret Zoo. What's one thing about money you wish you knew last year?
That there were golden coins worth $100, I think.
Fill in the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is...
Spending?
What do you want your legacy to be?
A book? Fiction books?
You want to write fiction books? That's what you want your legacy to be?
Yes.
I can't wait to read those books. Well, Kaylin, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
You're welcome.
All right, Dreamers, I hope you enjoyed today's episode with my husband, Serge, and my 7-year-old, Kaylin. I cannot wait to see you back here next week. It's going to be 2022, so I cannot wait to catch up so we can have the best year ever together. Until then, XOXO. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Dreamers Podcast. You can find the episode show notes and all of the links mentioned at dreamoflegacy.com. If you liked today's episode, here's what you can do to support me and help more dreamers discover the podcast. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate and review the podcast to help the podcast gain more visibility. Share the podcast with your family, friends, and coworkers. And if you really enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to tag me at thedreamers.podcast on Instagram and let me know what you liked about today's episode. All right, Dreamers, that's it for today. I will see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers Podcast.
Okay, Dreamers. Time to build this legacy.
This podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax, legal, financial planning, insurance, accounting, investment, or any other kind of professional advice or services. Please consult with an appropriate tax, financial, or legal professional to receive appropriate advice based on your situation.
Sunday, Skincare Day, is one of the ways I keep my sanity in these crazy times. Dreamino is an all-natural, Black-owned skincare brand carefully handcrafted by parents who could not find the proper care solutions to address their family skin problems. All Dreamino products are made of organic and high-quality ingredients, meticulously chosen to give your skin the smooth results and the glow it deserves.